I got a call from a guy named Mark. He sounded tired on the phone, not rude or angry, just exhausted in a way that made me think he hadn't had a good night's sleep in a very long time. He needed someone to come look at his kitchen sink because the water pressure was dropping and the pipes were making this horrible noise that sounded like something was dying in there. So I packed up my truck with all my tools and drove out to his place in a quiet suburban neighborhood. When I pulled up, I saw a nice house, but it was a bit worn around the edges. The paint on the front porch was peeling, the lawn needed to be mowed, and the mailbox was hanging crooked. But even with all that, you could tell it was a home, the kind of place where people actually lived and made memories. Mark opened the door, and he had that look. You know the one I'm talking about. That tired single dad look that says he's been trying to hold everything together for way too long. His shirt had a stain on it. His hair was messy and uncombed, and he had this permanent crease between his eyebrows from worrying all the time. He introduced himself with a weak smile and said, "Thanks for coming, man. It's just me and my daughter here." I nodded and got to work, pulling out my wrenches and pipe fittings, ready to fix whatever was wrong with that sink. As I was kneeling down on the kitchen floor and unpacking my tools, I heard this tiny pitter-patter of little feet running across the tile floor. A little girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old, came running into the kitchen with so much energy that it almost made me dizzy just watching her. She was wearing this bright, sparkly unicorn t-shirt that had glitter all over it, and her hair was done up in 2 wild pigtails that were pointing in completely opposite directions like she had just woken up from a nap. She had the biggest brown eyes I had ever seen in my entire life. Eyes that looked like they had seen way too much for someone so young. She just stopped right in front of me and stared, completely fearless, like she wasn't scared of strangers at all. Her dad, Mark, gave her a gentle smile and said, "Lily, this is the nice man who's going to fix our sink. Say hello." But she didn't say hello. She just kept staring at me with those big brown eyes. And honestly, it was a little bit unnerving. Most kids either hide behind their parents' legs or run away when they see a stranger. But not this one. She stood there looking at me like I was a puzzle she was trying to figure out. I got back to work, crawling under the sink to inspect the mess of pipes. And let me tell you, it was a disaster down there. The previous owner had done some real DIY nonsense that was honestly dangerous. Pipes connected wrong, seals missing. It was a miracle the whole kitchen wasn't flooded. I had to replace a whole section of pipe, which meant I was going to be down there for a while, sweating and struggling with rusted nuts and bolts. I was deep in the zone, working under that sink, trying to loosen this one stubborn nut that absolutely refused to budge, when I felt a tiny tap on my shoulder. I looked up and there was Lily. She had taken a seat on the kitchen floor right next to me, cross-legged and comfortable like she was settling in for a long conversation. She was hugging this ragged-looking, stuffed bunny rabbit that had clearly seen better days. One of its ears was hanging by a thread and its fur was all matted and worn from years of love. She didn't speak at first. She just sat there watching me work, her little head tilted to the side with curiosity. And then, out of nowhere, she asked me this question that completely blindsided me and knocked the wind right out of my lungs. She said, "Do you miss your mom?" I froze. I literally froze with the wrench still in my hand. My whole body went stiff and my brain went completely blank. I did not see that coming at all. I was expecting questions about what I was doing or why the pipes were making noise, but not that. I looked at Mark and his face just completely fell, like all the blood had drained out of it in an instant. He turned this shade of pale that was honestly scary to see, and he looked embarrassed and pained at the same time, like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Before I could even process what she had asked or come up with some kind of answer, Lily looked down at her bunny and answered her own question. She said, "My mommy's in heaven. That's what Daddy says." Her voice was so calm and matter-of-fact, like she was talking about the weather or what she had for breakfast. That right there was the moment. Everything just stopped and the world went completely quiet around us. I couldn't hear the ticking of the clock on the wall anymore. I couldn't hear the hum of the refrigerator, nothing. All I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Mark rubbed his face with his hands, the way people do when they're trying really hard not to fall. a part in front of someone else. This wasn't just some random kid asking a weird question because she was curious. This was a 6-year-old girl who had experienced the biggest loss of her entire life, and she was asking a complete stranger to help her make sense of something that doesn't make sense to anyone. This was her way of processing grief, of trying to understand where her mother went and why she wasn't coming back. And here I was, this random handyman who had shown up to fix a leaky pipe, and suddenly I was in the middle of something way bigger than any plumbing problem. I realized in that moment that my training as a handyman was completely useless here. I can fix a pipe, I can fix a leak, I can rewire a light switch and replace a broken garbage disposal. But a broken heart? I didn't have a tool for that. No one does. I had a choice to make in that second, and it was a choice that would determine how this little girl would remember this moment for the rest of her life. I could have taken the easy way out, the professional way out, the way that most adults would have handled it. I could have given her some generic adult answer like, "Oh, I'm so sorry about your mom," and just looked down and kept working on the sink, pretending like nothing had happened. That would have been the polite thing to do, the thing that didn't make me uncomfortable or force me to deal with emotions I wasn't prepared for. It would have been a nice way of saying, "This is way above my pay grade. Kid, I'm just here to fix the sink." Mark was trying to apologize. He was stumbling over his words and making little sounds like he was trying to stop her or explain her away. But the words just weren't coming out. He looked so helpless standing there, like he wanted to protect his daughter from the pain, but didn't know how. But I knew this moment was bigger than me being uncomfortable or awkward. This was Lily's moment, and she needed someone to hear her, to see her, to validate what she was feeling. This is the thing about grief that people don't really understand until they see it up close. Grief doesn't have a timeline, and it doesn't care how old you are. It hits you when you least expect it, in quiet moments on kitchen floors, and it demands to be felt. The challenge for single parents like Mark is that they have to carry their own grief while also trying to manage their children's grief. And that's like trying to bail water out of a sinking boat while you're drowning yourself at the same time. I put my wrench down on the floor and wiped my hands on my pants, taking a deep breath because I knew I needed to be careful with my words. I decided to be honest with this little girl because she deserved that much. She deserved the truth even if it was uncomfortable. I looked at her and said, "No, sweetheart, I don't miss my mom because she's still here. But you know what? My grandfather, my grandpa, he's in heaven too." I said it gently, softly, like I was handling something fragile and breakable. Lily tilted her head to the side, her pigtails flopping over, and she asked, "Does he have wings?" I couldn't help but smile at that. Kids have such a pure and simple way of understanding things that adults overcomplicate. I told her, "I don't know. I don't think so. He was a big guy and he always wore these old suspenders, and I think he would look really silly with wings. I think he's just up there watching over us, making sure we're okay." Mark slowly slid down onto the floor next to his daughter, putting his arm around her and pulling her close, and I could see the relief wash over his face. He wasn't alone in this moment anymore. He didn't have to carry the weight of her question all by himself, and that made a huge difference. Mark started talking. He looked at Lily and said, "Your mom, she was the best at fixing things. She would have fixed the sink in about 10 minutes flat." And then he laughed. It was a broken laugh, but it was still a laugh, and it felt like a small victory in the middle of all that pain. He was allowing himself to remember her in a new way, letting her be present in that kitchen even though she was gone, and that was beautiful to witness. Mark told me that his wife had passed away about 18 months ago, cancer, and it happened so fast that he barely had time to process it before she was gone. He said she was the planner, the talker, the one who remembered everyone's birthdays and made all the important phone calls, while he was the quiet one who worked in IT and kept to himself. He admitted that he never knew how to do the feelings stuff. He was just surviving day by day, trying to keep things together for Lily. And then Lily, this tiny incredible human being, pointed at her dad and said, "Daddy cries when he watches the princess movies. We used to watch with Mommy." Mark's face just crumpled at that. The tears started rolling down his cheeks, and he couldn't stop them. He wasn't trying to hide it anymore. He put his face in his hands and just let it all out. The grief, the exhaustion, the loneliness, all of it. And then Lily reached over and patted his back, comforting him with her tiny little hand, and said, "It's okay, Daddy." She was comforting her own father. This 6-year-old girl who had lost her mother was now being the strong one. And it was both heartbreaking and amazing at the same time. I realized in that moment that the most broken things in that house weren't the pipes under the sink. It was their hearts, 2 hearts that had been shattered and were slowly trying to piece themselves back together. But even with all that brokenness, there was this incredible strength shining through. This beautiful, messy, raw reality of a father and daughter learning to live without someone they loved so much. I finished fixing the sink. It wasn't that big of a deal really. A leaky pipe, a few adjustments, and about 20 more minutes of work. But I didn't just pack up and leave like I usually do. I stayed and helped Mark clean up my tools, and we just stood there in the quiet for a minute. Lily was in the living room, humming a song to herself, some little tune that sounded like a lullaby, and it was the most peaceful sound I had ever heard. Mark dried his eyes and took a shaky breath, looking at me with this gratitude that I didn't feel like I deserved. And he finally said, "I'm sorry you had to see that. She's been asking a lot of questions lately and I never know what to tell her." I looked him straight in the eyes and told him, "I don't think there's any right answer, Mark. I think you just keep telling her the truth, because she's smart and she figure it out. She just needs you to be there with her." That day, a little girl in a unicorn sure taught me that the bravest thing you can do is be vulnerable and let people see your pain.